Welcome to the Motherhood Alliance podcast, the podcast dedicated to empowering moms and families on their health and wellness journey. I'm Brittany Suttner.
And I'm Andrea Rinkus. Together, we're here to explore holistic approaches that go beyond conventional medicine.
Each week, we dive into topics that matter most to you. Everything from nutrition and mental health to alternative therapies and natural living.
And whether you're a new mom navigating the early stages of parenthood or a seasoned pro looking for new ways to support your family's well-being, you're in the right place.
Even better, all of our guests are local small business owners who you can actually talk to and work with. You can learn more about today's guest and connect with hundreds of other health and wellness professionals through our informative and easy-to-use directory at motherhoodalliance.com.
Before we get started, keep in mind that this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for personal healthcare advice. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any changes based on the podcast content.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Are you ready to help your family thrive? Let's get started. Hi, we are Britt and Drea from motherhoodalliance.com, and we are excited to welcome you to a 4-episode series with Tylynn Ludwig, the owner of Tylynn Nutrition Therapy. Tylynn is a registered dietitian, certified eating disorder specialist, and sports nutrition pro with a passion for helping people heal their relationship with food. Tylynn works through an intuitive eating and health at every size lens, and she's all about busting nutrition myths, challenging diet culture, and bringing empowerment and joy to food. When Tylynn is not transforming lives through nutrition, she's currently training for the Ironman Women's World Championship in Kona, which will take place this October. And for those of you who are not familiar with what that is a very long-distance triathlon with swimming, biking, and running. Tylynn is a powerhouse of a woman, and we can't wait to share her deep nutritional knowledge with you. So turn up your volume and let's welcome her to the show. Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. We're excited to welcome Tylynn here. Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
We are really excited to talk about nutrition. I don't think we've had a nutritionist on the podcast yet, so you guys need to turn up your volumes because she's going to be talking about multiple different areas that I think a lot of people are asking questions about throughout our 4 episodes together. But of course, before we dive into that, we want to start with learning a little bit about you. And so you shared a fun fact about how much you love bright colors, and this even tied into a recent bike that you purchased. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yes, so I recently got a triathlon bike. That's my fun hobby that I do, though I always joke I like doing that more than nutrition. Not really. I love nutrition, but truly I love triathlon as well. And when you're out on longer bike rides, because I like long endurance races, you want to have something fun that you're looking at. So I've got a bright pink and purple and green bike that I've named Pegasus the Battlecorn.
I love that name. I mean, you're in battle, right? When you're riding it. So.
Yes, it's very empowering.
I love that. So do you feel like you sprinkle in your love of color into like everything you do? Obviously the nutrition aspect, that fits really well in, right? Fruits and vegetables, things like that. But in general, do you love to just sprinkle color into your life?
Yes. You guys know my sister and she's always giving me her old clothes because she's like, maybe I liked that orange color, but not really. One time I'll give that to Tylynn because I know she'll wear it and it'll look good on her.
And her sister is Kim Klimek, and she's been on our podcast as well. So just tying the knot there. So I'd love to learn a little bit about your journey and how you got into nutrition in the first place. So why don't you start back to where this interest first started and how you got into starting your own business?
Yeah, it is a really interesting story because for the longest time, I actually wanted to be a veterinarian. And when I was younger, I couldn't pronounce the word veterinarian. So I would always say, I want to be a vegetarian when I'm older. So I'm not a vegetarian, but it was kind of a little glimpse into my psyche and interest in nutrition, maybe even before I even realized fully what I wanted to do with life. But the whole dietitian thing came about when one of my friends in high school was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. And her mom became very interested in nutrition and how that could support her health. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever, that if somebody had some sort of condition, that the way that they eat could help them improve their condition or manage their condition. And so that's really what piqued my interest in nutrition originally, was helping people with chronic medical conditions.
Okay, and now I know that you love talking about intuitive eating, which we'll talk about in an entirely different episode. You also specialize in eating disorders, which will have its own episode as well. So how did you kind of get into having these specialties too?
Yes. So the specialties came along later in life. I struggled with my relationship with food in college, and I really thought at that time I never wanted to touch like eating disorders with like a 10-foot pole. I was like, I'm struggling with my own stuff. I got support, but I was like, I don't want to work with people like that. But as I was further along in my career, it actually helped me like process my own journey with my relationship with food, like having worked with people like that. And even now I just have such a strong relationship with my body and nutrition because I'm constantly talking about it and like reinforcing it. So it really kind of stems back from pressure in college to not gain the freshman 15 or whatever they call it now, which is actually kind of a myth. There's actually not like the freshman 15, but everybody says it and you hear about it. And that kind of got me concerned at that age. And really, I wasn't meant to be worrying about, my weight at that age. I was meant to be worrying about like, going to class and having fun and not my weight, but it kind of started there.
So stemming from some personal experience that led you into some of the specialties, which is awesome and needed. And so thank you for doing those things. In this episode, though, we're going to be talking to everyone. And we're going to go back to the basics with nutrition because I think a lot of people hear these big words like macronutrients, but they don't really know what that means. So let's start super high level. Tell us, what are macronutrients?
Yes, this is a great question. And I love that we're bringing it back to the basics because so often in my sessions, people have a lot of misconceptions about food. And so when we really break it down, there's three things or three components of food that fuel our body. There's carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And that's really all food is. Right? Some foods have more carbohydrates, some foods have more protein, some have more fat. And then there's micronutrients, which are different vitamins. Okay. But really at the end of the day, it's all about the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Carbohydrates are our body's number one source of energy. So the average person, they need about 45 to 65% of their diet coming from carbohydrates. That's the average person. We're not talking about chronic medical conditions or an athlete. Those needs are going to vary. But the average person, 45 to 65% of our diet. So maybe at least half of it should be coming from carbohydrates because it's our body's number one source of energy. That's broken down into glucose and utilized as our cell's preferred form of energy. So that's carbohydrates. Next is protein. So protein, most of us know it's responsible for helping us maintain lean muscle mass, but it's also part of enzymes in our body. So we're constantly doing cellular reactions in our body, and we need protein to be able to conduct those cellular reactions. And then the last piece of these macronutrients is fat. So fat is a part of every cell membrane in our body. I keep mentioning cells.
I can tell that you're like hovering on the line of how nerdy do I get here and how high level do I stay? Because we could get really deep, but I think you're doing a good job giving an overview. And, and a lot of people find fat scary. So it's important that you're saying it's needed for all of our cells.
Absolutely. So most of us forget the fattiest organ in our body is actually our brain. It mostly contains fat. So we need fat for brain health, but it's also important for hormonal health as well. So part of the structure of our cell membranes, hormonal health, and parts of our organs, and of course, when we take in dietary fat, that's helping us to support, healthy fats in our body as well. So things like omega-3 fatty acids, for example, those are really helpful in boosting brain health, but also helping with managing inflammation in the body.
And let's stay right on fat for a second. Can you break down the different types of fats? Because there are fats that are considered healthy fats, and then there's unhealthy fats, saturated fat, trans fat. You just said omegas. So can you just give us a really quick overview on the different types of fats? And maybe if somebody, help us kind of debunk this whole fats are bad thing. If somebody's looking at a nutrition label, which fats are good and which fats are bad? Is it as simple as that?
Yes, but I'm going to go back even further into your question because you said bad fat versus good fat. And we're going to get into intuitive eating and all of that in another episode. But I want to start by saying, like, I don't even say good versus bad with any foods. I'm saying, like, some fats we need to have more frequently in our diet, and we need to have more of those. Some of them we just need to have less of, but they're still providing some health benefits to us. So the ones that we want to have more frequently in our diet and that the average American is not getting enough of is the ones that we call unsaturated fats. So those are ones that are liquid at room temperature. Things like our olive oil, canola oil, foods that naturally contain fat. So things like avocado, nuts, seeds, fatty fish like salmon and tuna. So those are all higher in those unsaturated fats, which again, we know most Americans are not getting enough of. So we need more of those. We need less of the ones we call saturated fats, which are solid at room temperature. So those are found in like fattier cuts of meat, butter, full fat cheeses, full fat dairy products. So we just need a little bit less of those compared to the ones that are liquid at room temperature. Now, the other category you mentioned, which is trans fats, this is one where we don't actually need that in our body for any reason. They're man-made. What happens is companies have made these fats in order to help products be more stable on the shelf. It's through a chemical process called hydrogenation, which we don't need to get into. It's very, also very nerdy. But basically, those products are going to be like packaged snack cakes, for example, might contain trans fat. Some forms of peanut butter actually contain trans fat if it has any hydrogenated oil in it. I do recommend that people stay away from those as much as possible. If you eat these here and there, you're not going to get some sort of chronic disease, but as much as possible, trying to limit or avoid trans fats because we know that it actually raises our bad cholesterol and lowers our good cholesterol.
Interesting. And I feel like we could just do an entire episode just on fats alone. But when it comes to food on our plates and like proportions, you mentioned carbs should be 40 to 60%. Is that what you said?
45 to 65% is the RDA or recommended dietary adequacy.
And you talk about the plate model. So what is this?
Yes, so that's a great question. The plate model by the USDA is a little bit different than the plate model that I generally teach my clients. And I use a plate model based off of what Wendy Sterling and Casey Crosby have come up with. They're two dietitians who are very well known in the eating disorder field, but they also work with young adults and athletes. So this plate model is very versatile. The problem I find with the USDA plate is that it may not be enough nutrition. It may be more appropriate for older adults. And so I'll explain the differences and why that is. If we've got a 10-inch plate in front of us, the USDA says about half that plate should be fruits and vegetables. A quarter of the plate should be protein, and then a quarter of the plate would be starch. That's what the USDA says. Adolescents may need more than that. So they may need maybe half their plate coming from starches or carbohydrates, a quarter coming from protein, and then a quarter from the fruits or vegetables. And then there are also adults who may need, or other adolescents who are less active, may need closer to the third plate model, where that plate kind of looks like a peace sign, where a third of the plate is fruits and vegetables, a third of it is starches, and then the third of it is protein.
So when you're kind of talking about navigating these different types of plate models, you mentioned in your last one that would be for somebody who's maybe a little bit less active. So in general, what pieces are you looking at the carbohydrate level on how much is that the piece that's kind of swaying and shifting how much each person should be getting? Is it almost based off of activity because that's how much energy they're going to need? Explain a little bit more about how you're deciding what somebody's plate should look like based off their lifestyle.
Yeah, so it's based on a variety of factors. Energy level is one of them, but there's also genetic factors, right? People's metabolisms vary based on genetics. It also varies based on age, gender, muscle mass. So I could have the same client who's 5'2" and 110 pounds that they need a completely different plate versus another client who's 5'2" and 110 pounds, just based on maybe one's male and one's female and one's 45 and one's 18, right? Sure. So that's a hard question to answer. It just really depends on so many different factors.
So you're basically, the USDA has their specific thing, like everyone should be doing it this way, but you really tend to make sure that the people you're working with know what they need, and you base it off of your plate recommendation in that way.
Exactly. And that's why I find it's very hard to sometimes say, here is a plate model for people to follow. Like if I was to put that out on my social media, for instance, because I know each person is very unique.
And I feel like the plate model is a little easier for people to understand too, versus like the pyramid, where you're like looking at it and you're like, okay, I don't know how much those bottom carbs should be, or, so I feel like the plate model is a little easier to see.
Yeah. And I think that's why the USDA switched from teaching people about the pyramid to teaching about the plate. The pyramid is outdated, and I can't remember when they switched over, but I do remember in 7th grade, I learned about the food pyramid. So It's not that old.
Yep.
Well, let's shift the topic a little bit to more of when we're eating during the day. So is it better to eat 3 larger meals and then like limit snacks? Is it better to be kind of grazing and snacking all the way throughout the day? What's kind of your philosophy on that?
Yes, another great question. I love it because people feel so guilty for snacking. And I'm like, that's so normal, natural, and necessary. Now, the amount of snacks that you need may vary, again, depending on your activity level, your age, muscle mass, all those good things that I mentioned earlier. But snacking is totally normal and probably necessary for most Americans. So I generally recommend 3 meals a day with 2 to 3 snacks, depending on somebody's activity level. And now, athletes is a whole different ballgame. We'll get to talking about that more because they're going to need even more than that, and nutrition potentially during their sport, depending on the length of the sport. But
do you have a guidance for snacks? Like if you're reaching for a snack, you talked about the balanced plate for a meal. Should you be making sure that you have like a protein and a fat and a carb with a snack, or is it kind of just, free for all?
Yeah. Great question. It can be a free for all, but generally we want to have a balance of those macronutrients that you're saying. So, for example, an apple with some peanut butter, that is going to be more satiating and actually give you energy versus just having a protein shake, for example, because you're only getting one nutrient profile. If you're getting carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, that's really helping you stay full between your meals and helping you get to that next meal with also giving you those added nutrients from the food that you're consuming.
Okay, so what advice do you have for families trying to maintain a healthy eating with a busy schedule? Because we have a lot of families listening, or a lot of moms listening to this podcast. So I think that's a big struggle for me and Brett for sure too, is what about families with busy schedules and trying to help with our kids have nutrients that they need to?
Great question, and one that I get really often. I think planning ahead is your best friend. Okay, so what does that mean? That means prioritizing any time of the week that you want that works best for you. So for most families, it's a Saturday or Sunday. I'm going to take 1 hour to think about my meals for the week. Could you carve out 1 hour in your busy schedule to just think about what you're going to be eating for the week? And I promise you that hour could save you so much time and headache right? If we're optimizing the time that we're more resourced, thinking about what I'm going to get at the grocery store and actually having a conversation with your kids around what do they want to have this week. Maybe they get to choose what they want for dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Or maybe it's my kid's going to get to cook dinner one day a week.
Oh yeah, that's great too. Yeah.
Yeah. We've dabbled in some of that as well. And obviously we're always pivoting, right? Like something that works for us one year might not be working for us in a different season as life changes. But a couple of things that we've tried personally is I am not perfect at this. I go in seasons of doing well and then seasons of falling off the bandwagon. But I actually try to meal plan a month at a time. And so what I do is I write down all of my days and then like what do we have in the evenings. And I'm only talking about dinners. I don't do this for breakfast and lunches because typically it's leftovers. I write down, okay, we have a date night this night. We have this for the kids that night. And I just write down all the activities. Those are typically leftover nights. And then I try to pick like 2 or 3 meals a week and then do double recipes because I'm not going to lie. I'm not someone who actually loves cooking. So the least of it I can do is going to be really great.
I don't like being in the kitchen as long and the cleanup and everything else. Yeah.
But I actually found having to have this to-do item sitting down every weekend to do this, that felt really heavy to me. And so I would just take a whole month. I would sit down, like you said, for about an hour or so, just list out, what does this equate to? If you do 4 meals a week times 4, it's 16 meals. And then they're flexible, but it's kind of like this week, here are my 4 meals. I can shift them around whatever days I need to. I list out my grocery list for the entire month in 4 different sections if I'm shopping weekly. Just trying to, for me personally, it just felt easier to do 1 sit down a month than to do 4. And then I loved how you mentioned bringing the kids into the kitchen itself. This is something also we're definitely not perfect with, but we've dabbled with is I will tell you, my son, you guys have heard me talk about my son in the past.
He's famous.
He's so funny. But anytime he cooks a meal, he's just raving about it and eats like 4 times the portion. Mom, everything I make is so delicious. Gosh. I'm like, you're right. Keep cooking.
Keep going, buddy.
And now you also get to do the dishes. But yeah, I thought that those were some really great tips. I would love for you to just run through some of your offerings. What do you do? How do you support people? And
Yeah, so that is a perfect segue into what I was going to mention is that is a really common problem for a lot of families or barriers that they face is time and trying to organize their thoughts and ideas around food. I do have a software that I work with my families on meal planning. So it actually curates grocery lists for families, recipes, and ideas so that they have something to go off of initially. So when you work with me, you get access to that software, which people find really helpful. So I do one-on-one nutrition appointments. So that can be for 60 minutes. It could be for 45 minutes. Generally, everybody that I work with, I start with an assessment process, which means that you sit down with me for 60 minutes. We talk about your health history, what you're doing currently, and then I give you recommendations. And then we're following up however frequently feels best for the client. So that could be once a week for several weeks. It could be once every other week. It could be once a month. It's really individual to the person. So that's one way, is just individual sessions.
And are these typically virtual?
Yes. I do have an in-person office in Madison, but I would say 95% of my work now is virtual. And the benefit of that is I can actually get into your home with you and I can see, hey, show me your kitchen, show me your refrigerator, show me your pantry. What do we got here? What are we working with? What are you thinking about when you go to the grocery store? Do you want me to go to the grocery store with you? Do you need help picking out different options or learning about nutrition labels? So those one-on-one appointments can include grocery shopping at the grocery store. They can include going through your pantry. They can include literally me cooking with you virtually. That's the beauty.
That's cool.
Yeah. That's the beauty of being a private dietitian is that I get to do all those things. Whatever you need me for is what I'm here for and whatever we think is going to be most helpful for you. So the other option that I have is coaching packages. What that means is that we kind of decide upfront, I'd like to work with you for 3 months, 6 months, a full year. Those are people who are really committed to having lifestyle changes and need frequent contact with me. So again, it's always going to start out with an assessment, and then they follow up with me weekly. Generally, it's a 30-minute check-in each week, and we have high level of contact.
Yeah, talk about accountability.
Yes.
That sounds awesome.
So, some people really need that accountability, right? That's really what, people are coming to me for. They may know all of these things, but they need somebody in their ear being like, hey, let's really transform your health. And let's keep you motivated.
And let's keep your eyes on the goal, right?
Yeah.
Why you contacted me in the first place. That's so great. Thank you for sharing that. And I do want to mention that Tylynn has offered 10% off of any of her services for our listeners. So if you want to take advantage of that, you can just send her a message, send her an email, and just let her know you heard about her on the Motherhood Alliance podcast. Can you just share what is your website?
Yeah, so it's my name, Tylynn Nutrition Therapy.com.
I want you guys who are listening to stay tuned for our next 3 episodes, because this was kind of a high level nutrition overview, but we will be diving into intuitive eating, which really does apply to everyone and is, I think, the best way to be eating. And so that's going to be our next episode. Then we'll be diving into specific groups. So talking about eating disorders and signs and symptoms of those. So those of you who have kids, obviously that's something we want to make sure that we are aware of as they're growing up. Maybe it applies to yourself as well. And then in episode 4, we're going to be talking about athletes and working out and how do you loop your nutrition into that in a healthy way. So thanks, Tylynn, for joining us for episode 1. We can't wait for more. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving a rating or review or sharing it directly with a friend who could benefit from the information? We know that you're a busy mom or caregiver, and our goal is to make your life easier by bringing tips and tricks directly from experts into your earbuds. By sharing this episode with someone you love, you can play a critical role in helping to make their life easier as well. We appreciate your time, and thank you for being a part of the Motherhood Alliance family.